Good morning, St. Andrews. Good morning to all of you who have braved the snowy weather in Markham to be in church today, and welcome to all of us who are coming in from many different places on Zoom. Glad you could be with us today on this first Sunday of Advent. As we always do, we start our worship together by acknowledging the territory upon which we are worshiping. I'm coming to you from Canmore, Alberta, and I live, work, play, and worship on the traditional lands of the Stoney Nakoda, the Bears Paw, Chiniki, and Wesley Nations. They are co-signatories with other First Nations in the south part of Alberta, Treaty 7, and we also acknowledge the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. Tara.
Every community owes its existence and vitality to generations from around the world who contributed their hopes, dreams, and energy to making the history that led to today. Some people were brought here against their will. Some were drawn to leave their distant homes in hopes of a better life, and some have lived on this land for more generations than can be counted. Here at St. Andrews, we live, work, and worship on the traditional territories of the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe. We acknowledge that many of us are near the beginning of learning about the injustices Indigenous people have faced and continue to face in Canada. We acknowledge and thank all generations of Indigenous peoples across Turtle Island for their commitment, contributions, and protection of the land and its resources. As we make time this Sunday to discuss racial justice, we are reminded that acknowledging the land is a small step towards reconciliation. We will work towards taking larger steps so that we can move forward with all our neighbors in a good way. I'd also like to welcome everyone this morning. At St. Andrew's United Church, our mission includes inspiring faith, practicing compassion, and building connection in our community and the world. And we have a vision. Our vision is to be creative and courageous people empowered by the Spirit, to practice love, reconciliation, and justice with authenticity, to be a spiritual home where Jesus' love for all is visible as we serve our diverse and multi-generational community.
If you have a candle handy, I will invite you to light it with me. I have dud matches right now. Let's see if I can get one to actually light. Another one. Come on, light for me. My husband doesn't believe me that I have an issue with these. We have a light, praise God. We light a candle signifying the centrality of the presence of Christ. In our Advent waiting, we light an Advent candle wreath as we await to light the Christ candle in the middle, but we don't stop lighting a Christ candle in our midst as we gather to worship. I have a few announcements. I want to say thank you to Yvonne for all her work and her patience for the lovely newsletter. I would ask you to pay attention to page 2 that has the an outline of the services that are coming up in December. Also take note of the Mrs. Claus Angels. This week is the final week to contribute to that very good work. Today is Tim's Sunday off. If you're in the sanctuary, you probably see him. I can't, but it is his Sunday off, but he has been gracious enough to both attend and help us, help the transition team with our racial justice congregational event today. And we are having a congregational event today. It's going to look different because we can't have the 90 minutes that we ordinarily would have when we have a Zoom gathering. And ordinarily, when we've had these congregational events, we've had Zoom rooms where we've had a chance to speak together and process some of the information. That's not going to happen today. So we still want to hear your responses. We are noting who is in the worship in the sanctuary, and you will receive an email with a response form. I will be taking note of who is participating on Zoom today. You will get an email inviting you to respond. If you do not wish to do a response online, Gwyneth has made 10 copies of the paper response form. And so I would invite you to find Gwyneth Mast after the service, and she will give you a paper response form. You can fill it out and leave it with the greeters to go back up to the office, or you can drop it off at the office later today. Whew. There we go. And I'm going to screen share. We are using a lovely new resource coming from the United Church of Canada for Advent, and this is week 1, Hope.
Oh, come and be the hope in all our lives. Though chaos and confusion still survives, we know the path of hate all too well. We need our God with us, Emmanuel. Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come to us, and all things shall be well.
When the world seems scary, when we try to escape and hide, the Holy invites us to confront fear, and we find hope. Where in the world do we find hope these days?
Thank you, Jeannie and Dorothy. And let's ponder that question. Where in the world do we find hope these days? I'm going to invite you to sing along with Michael our first Advent hymn, hymn 29 in Voices United, Hark the Glad Sound. We're singing verses 1 and 3.
The
scripture reader today is Georgia Ankle, who is reading an Advent reading from the prophet Jeremiah. Georgia.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Hope all is well. Snowing here, but it's all good. Scripture reading from Jeremiah 33, verses 14 to 16. The righteous brand and covenant with David. The days are surely coming, says the Lord, when I will fulfill the promise I made to the house of Israel and to the house of Judah. In those days and at that time, I will cause a righteous branch to spring up for David, and he shall execute justice and righteousness in the land. In those days, Judah will be saved from Jerusalem. We live in safety, and this is the name by which it will be called. The Lord is our righteousness. Therein lies the reading.
Thank you, Georgia. For our congregational event today, we're focusing on racial justice. We're celebrating the end of the 40 days of engagement on anti-racism. It has been a really powerful process to go through these 40 days for those of us who have engaged it. And the transition team wanted to be able to give the congregation just a little flavor of what it was like to hear so many different perspectives, see the issues of racial justice and anti-racism from so many different perspectives, and to be having it all grounded in the church, in prayer and faith reflections. And so I'm going to give a really brief biblical background on why we do this work. So to start off, I need to say that holy texts in any religion have always been used to inspire freedom movements and to legitimate powers that control others. And the Bible, my friends, I'm afraid, can back up any message that we want to promote. The Bible was used to legitimate centuries of those in power, from Constantine to Queen Elizabeth. It also made the Protestant Reformation into a movement of the common people when the Bible was translated into German and printed and given to the people to read for themselves. In fact, they learned to read with the Bible. And then the Bible infused their lives and gave their lives meaning in a way that going to church and receiving the host didn't in the Catholic tradition. It fueled not only reformations, but revolutions. While ordinary people have had access to the Bible since the Protestant Reformation, the meaning and interpretation was still held mostly by men who were European or North American and privileged and highly educated and pretty separate from the lives of regular people, until the 60s and 70s, when some Catholic priests working along very poor people in Latin American countries stopped telling the people what the Bible meant, and instead translated the Bible into their language. And once again, people learned how to read, reading the Bible, and they asked the people what the Bible meant. And it was hugely powerful. People recognized themselves in the stories, and they gave the priests complex and freeing messages of God being in their lives. A theology of liberation emerged that was flavored differently in each context and wherever that mode of biblical interpretation went. So everyone, farm laborers, including women and children, lived and spoke about what the Bible meant to them. Theologies of liberation have been growing and changing the global church for 50 years. biblical reflections and so many of the daily reflections through the 40 days of engagement on anti-racism have given such a wonderful flavor to all of these different lenses. On day 18, Sun Do-hyun named several stories of people of the Bible on the move, facing all of the dangers of migration, immigration, and refugees fleeing danger. On day 20, Mitchell Anderson cited Ephesians 2:22-18, saying that on the cross of Jesus reconciles all people into one. And so Indigenous Christians stand with Black persons in saying Black Lives Matter. On day 24, Peter Goldberger wrote powerfully about one of my favorite gospel stories, the story of the Canaanite or Syrophoenician woman. Friends, Jesus is racist in this story, pure and simple. He starts out refusing to respond to her plea for healing for her daughter, but she does not take his racist slur. Instead, she responds directly to him, challenging him to move beyond his own racism. And he does. And her daughter is healed because of her great faith. The 40 days of engagement began powerfully with a message from Paul Douglas Walthall that set the stage biblically for the rest of the process. Paul wrote, as disciples of Jesus, we are called to continue the work of Jesus and to continue to proclaim the wonder and expansive and extravagant love of God. To proclaim means in both speech and action. To be anti-racist is to intentionally oppose racism. Racism is seen in our society when we judge others simply because of the color of their skin and physical features they bear. Racism is sinful because it denies the image of God in others and that all of us are created in God's image. He proclaims we are all called to be anti-racist disciples. And our work is based on the Bible, friends. We're going to sing with Michael the first verse of Spirit God, Be Our Breath, and then we're going to go into further reflections.
Spirit God, be our breath, be our song, blow through us, bringing strength to move on. Our world seems inward, defensive and drawn. Spirit God, be our song.
Good morning. Last week, I spoke of how the 40 days of engagement on anti-racism had made me more aware of racial justice. One of the speakers that contributed to making me more aware was the Reverend Bill Miller. He's host of the podcast series, Open Out, about the nitty-gritty of intercultural ministry. Bill gave his Zoom audience 3 scenarios to think about. As I read them, think about what is the bias in each of these scenarios. The first one is the surgeon's dilemma. A father and son are in a terrible car accident. The man dies and his son is rushed to the hospital. In the operating room, the surgeon can't operate and says, because this is my son. The second one, what's in a name? Researchers have found that the death rates in hurricanes with female names is twice that of hurricanes with male names. And the third one, what has height got to do with it? Less than 15% of American males are over 6 foot. But 60% of male corporate CEOs are over 6 foot. Less than 4% of American males are over 6'2", but 36% of male CEOs are. What is the bias in each of these scenarios? In the accident, the surgeon couldn't operate because she was the boy's mother. Hurricanes. When people heard a hurricane was coming with a female name, they didn't consider that it would be as dangerous as one with a male name, so they didn't prepare as well. Height bias. There was an unconscious preference for tall males in leadership position. It would be absurd to choose a CEO because of height. Bill Miller says that biases are malleable. Once we are aware of a bias, we are less likely to be affected by it. However, racism is less malleable. Racism develops when a bias joins with power, privilege, and entitlement. To uproot racism, we need to look at our own entitlement and privilege. Bill Miller states that racism and social biases are so pervasive in our culture that we are trained to see them as normal. To counter this, we need to transform our way of thinking by mindfulness and compassion. He gives 3 suggestions how to do this. The first one, slow down, breathe, pause before you react. Biases activate when we act quickly. The second one, bring assumptions to the surface. As you feel yourself reacting to someone, ask, what am I assuming? Bringing them out of the unconscious and rationally examine them can dissolve many assumptions. And finally, practice compassion. With kindness, recognize that we have been immersed in racist thinking. Feel appropriate remorse for words or actions that have hurt, but don't wallow. Self-shaming seldom helps.
Thank you for sharing that, Gwyneth. My short reflection this morning is about being both a daughter and a mother. And I think I've shared parts of this before, and some of you may have heard, but I grew up thinking that people could look at me and know that I have a Black parent and a white parent, but I've come to recognize, of course, there are people that look like me that have 2 parents that are also the same color as me. So my mother is Black. She has a warm, medium brown colored skin. She was born in Jamaica. My father is white. He was born in Canada to parents of European descent, and he's a fairly pale, white-skinned person. When I was young, it just happened that I went to school with a group of other children who also were multiracial with one white parent. So in my school life, I generally didn't have to deal with questions about my parents. People always knew my mom was my mom. But once I remember really distinctly waiting on the lawn of the school, and my father pulled up in his car and sort of leaned out the window and waved, and I said, oh, there's my dad, and I got up to leave, and an acquaintance said, that's your stepdad, right? And I said, no, that's my dad, bye. And so that was that's the first experience I really remember of someone outside my family who was certain that they needed to correct me, that I must be in error. But I've experienced it many times as a mother. My husband, Paul, woke up not feeling so well, so he stayed home this morning. Just a headache, which unfortunately he gets a lot. Not a concerning thing. But he has pale skin rivaling my father. And many of you know our children. Our firstborn has blue eyes. And while her skin is darker than her father's, it's lighter than mine. And she was blonde for her early childhood. So I learned quickly that at the park and in public places across the GTA, many people assumed that I was her nanny or that I was babysitting. When she was in preschool, one of her classmates' mothers asked me quietly, "So, Chantel's your stepdaughter, right?" I said, "No, she's my daughter." But she interrupted me then to say, "No, it's okay. I have stepchildren also." And that was kind of awkward because it is absolutely okay to have stepchildren, but believe me that I can be the expert on my family. So as a young mom, I met other mothers of biracial children, and most of them have had similar experiences. The pattern was this: the mothers with skin that was more pale than their children were frequently asked, often by strangers, where their children were from, where they had adopted them from. And the mothers who had darker skin than their children were asked if they were the babysitters or nannies. Our second born has brown eyes and skin almost the same color as mine. We have lots of family pictures. Once Paul was setting up for a work presentation, and a new colleague saw our family photo on the screen as he was getting ready to present something. He said, "Oh, obviously there's a first marriage in there somewhere." And Paul said, "Yes, well, this is the first marriage and these are the children." That's the whole family. So, and of course the kids get it also. "Your brother and sister, really? I don't believe you." So I know these responses are not necessarily malicious. And to the person asking or commenting, I'm sure it feels like they just asked one question or they just presented one idea. But to the person or family getting these questions or responses, it might be the second time that day or the third time that week, or it might be a regular intrusion into outings. And the message they get, especially children, is you don't fit in, you need to explain yourself, you're weird or strange. So my thoughts on these situations, a general comment is, if you find yourself wondering about a person or a family, it's okay to wonder. And if you want to ask questions, you need to determine if you have a relationship or not. And if you have a relationship, the opportunity will present itself to ask questions. Otherwise, it's okay to not know. There are lots of ways that families are made. Biological families can look different than what you may have seen on TV and in books. Growing up, as an adult, I can deal with it. It was a bit hard as a new mom, and kids, they just deserve to be kids. They don't need to justify who they are or who their family is. So we're going to transition now to Michael. He's going to do verse 2 of Spirit God, Be Our Breath. I apologize. Michael will lead us while we all join in with verse 2.
Patient God, soothe our pride, calm our fear, comfort us when we know you are near. We grow more certain our vision is clear. Patient God, calm our fear.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Good.
I think we're good.
Good. Good morning. I'm going to share with you this morning some of my experience in racial injustice. Racial injustice carries some critical elements: arrogance, egoism, and the lack of capability to understand and appreciate the difference of the others. This story is about my experience in a public meeting in a community that I live in, Markham, Ontario. We were discussing an initiative to change the way the community operates. It was an information and discussion section, and no voting was involved. In the forum, I expressed my rationale for disagreeing with the change, because it is not going to benefit all the residents. In fact, the change will unnecessarily cost more for some of them. After the meeting, a well-known lawyer neighbor, one of the initiators of the change, came to me arrogantly and shouted at me, saying to me, "Henry, you were XXX," in the language of profanity. He then ran away. I was shocked and got the impression that he was an arrogant racist because he is from a different cultural group. But at the same time, an idiom came to my mind. The idiom is, "No one is going to make me feel inferior without my consent." So even though he is a well-known lawyer who thinks he is superior, I'm not inferior. Some fellow residents who saw that terrible incident came to me and comforted me. The next day, the famous lawyer sent me an email apologizing for his misbehavior under the recommendation of other neighbors. I accepted the apology and the matter was resolved. And the lesson for me is, no one is born as a racist. No particular cultural group should bear a racist label. The neighbors who recommended the lawyer to apologize to me acted as ambassadors, and they are of the same cultural group as the lawyer. They contributed to minimizing racist practice in the community. So brothers and sisters, if we see someone who is arrogant and practice racism, would we recommend them to apologize and refrain from the practice? And after this story, I want to reflect on it. Racial injustice is a global phenomenon. Unfortunately, it also happens in Hong Kong, where I was born and raised. As a child, I was told that certain types of people, migrants from other parts of the world, are not as good as Hong Kongers. We call them foreign devils and some other terms signifying inferiority. As I grew more mature, I gained more knowledge about different parts of the world and found that advocating the inferiority of the others was only a human construction to marginalize the others. And as a Christian, I believe God does not discriminate. God loves every person, no matter where they come from or their background. And the lesson to be learned is, take the initiative to learn more about other cultures. God has made this world full of different colors, and life is a learning process. With this, I would like to pass the time to Reverend Tim and learn from his reflection. Reverend Tim, please.
Thank you, Henry. I just want to start by saying that even though I am 63 years old, I do not have a lot of practice telling you the story that I am going to tell you right now. I had an experience growing up which, I don't think there's any other way to say it, is extremely rare. It is not a common experience amongst particularly the population of North America and of Canada. When I was growing up, I loved to learn, and I was able to figure out many things in my life just because I was curious. I want to tell you about a couple of things that I learned when I was still very young. I learned that I was a good person. I was sincere and conscientious most of the time. And I learned that because my parents worked hard like so many parents do, to teach me that lesson. But I also learned something else. And this was not from my parents. This was from people outside of my family and outside of my circle of friends. I learned that my skin is white. I have white skin. That's how other people see me. Even if I tried not to care what the color of my skin is or your skin is, other people notice. My story is about growing up and learning that in my life, I would never be able to forget or ignore the color of my skin. And even though this is true, I am still a good person. I don't know how many of you still have some of your old class pictures from school. Well, I do. And last week, with my wife's help, I was able to find 4 of my old class pictures from elementary school days. Now, before I ask Shannon to show you those pictures on the screen, I want to explain briefly what it is you're going to see. You see, I was born in Trinidad, in the West Indies, and all of my elementary schooling was done in Trinidad except for grade 3. For that 1 year, when I was in grade 3, my parents were on furlough from their missionary work, and I attended Jesse Ketchum Public School in Toronto. Then we moved back to Trinidad, and I finished my elementary schooling at Grant Memorial Presbyterian School in Trinidad. I'm not going to give you very long to look at each of these pictures, but I am going to ask you a question. And the question, quite simply, is, can you see me? Can you tell which one is me? So, Shannon, please let us look at the first picture from grade 3 at Jesse Ketchum Public School in Toronto. Can you see me? Which one, if you can think you know which one is me, please tell me after church. Now let's look at the next picture. Can you see me? And the next picture. I don't know how it is I happened to get into the same place, back row, the following year. And the last picture. There are more students here because there were 2 or 3 classes together. But if you can see the picture well enough, you can probably still pick me out easily, even though there are a much larger number of classmates and students there. I am the only white person in those last 3 pictures. Thank you, Shannon. For all the time I lived and was growing up in Trinidad, I was a racial minority. And as a racial minority, I learned things that I truly believe are much harder for a person to learn when they are not in the minority. Now, I have to add quickly to that I was not an oppressed minority, which is so often the case. I was a privileged minority, but part of my story is that did not matter. The name calling was the same, and it happened every day. It happened so much that I was looking forward to moving to Canada when I was 16 and not having to hear those names anymore. Well, moving to Canada was another endeavor all of its own. Culture shock is real, and I don't know if there's enough time for me to give you even more of my story in that sense. But what I do know, and what you will never be able to convince me of otherwise, is that when you are a racial minority, you can never ignore the fact that your skin is a different color. There are two more verses in the hymn which we are learning this month, in the month of November. Verses 3 and 4 begin, "Loving God, be our voice, be our prayer." Let us continue singing as Michael leads us.
Loving God, be our voice, be our prayer, reaching out, praying hands as we share. We seek your guidance through friendship and care. Loving God, be our prayer. Spirit God, be our breath, be our song. Blow through us, bringing strength to move on. Through change, through challenge, we'll greet the new dawn. Spirit God, be our song.
I'd like to have the screen shift over to Lynella, who is our regional representative on the transition team. So she is going to lead us in our prayers and the Lord's Prayer.
Thank you. Let us join our hearts and minds in prayer. Holy One, on this Advent Sunday of hope, help us to remain faithful, even when questioned, to seek justice, although we are uncomfortable, and to always proclaim hope in these challenging times. Almighty God, we give thanks for many blessings this morning. Your gentle and enduring love, for life itself, and for this beautiful world. But Lord, our hearts are troubled as we cannot help but think of and pray for all those suffering and or affected by COVID-19 and its variants, especially in poorer and vulnerable countries. In these times of isolation, when people are apart from loved ones, distant from friends, away from neighbors, reassure them that nothing, not even coronavirus, can separate them from your love. We pray for our scientists as they work tirelessly to find answers. For those who do not have access to clean water, soap, and sanitation. For those without good health care. For families who are struggling to find food and shelter at this time of the year. Those who have suffered abuse. May God's loving embrace free them from fear. For all who are experiencing the collapse of social, political, and economic structures, may their hope be secured in God. For all whose hopes are unfulfilled and whose dreams are dying, may God open new doors with new visions and new opportunities to not only use their gifts, but also opportunities to enhance humanity. To all who live in fear and confusion, rich or poor, refugees or citizens, May they experience the light of Christ leading them to a fuller life. We remember those who are sick in hospitals and or care homes. May they feel God's healing presence. Remember those who are bereaved and grieving. And let's not forget the caregivers and supporters. God, be their healer, their comforter, and their protector. Holy loving one, although we may be separated by language and culture from our neighbors and others we connect with, we pray that, with your help, we'll really demonstrate our Christianity and loving our neighbors as ourselves. We confidently this morning leave all these with the one who taught us to pray, saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive them that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
We sing our closing hymn, number 30 in Voices United, Hail to God's Own Anointed. We're singing verses 1 and 2. Visha is going to have our, oh, I'm sorry, Michael, I jumped in too quickly. Go ahead.
Go now in peace, never be afraid. God will go with you each hour of every day. Go now in faith, steadfast, strong, and
Now we'll get to hear from Devisha, who has our benediction for us.
Good morning, everybody. I hope you're doing well. Today, Shannon asked me to share a little snippet of my life. And so I have this poem that's kind of like my testimony, kind of outlining my life and how God has kind of laced through everything I've been through. So I'll begin. I am attempting to find something worth holding on to. My life had slipped through my palms before I had time to grasp on to a stable reality. My fears, they bury me, held me under until I couldn't breathe, made me vicious so my heart was scared of me. I have this desire to obtain something greater, be better than I am, forget all that made me unable, yet there are burdens that crush my soul because I hate where I came from, but I'm so scared of where I'll go. I was 3 years old when the first gun was pointed at my face. A toddler when fear set into my bones as the men in blue took my father away. Church-sponsored meals followed. Touched our empty fridge. Often our bellies were left hungry, hollowed. I was 8 years old when I gave my life to Jesus. Hoping for a life better than what I had experienced, hoping to feel joy stronger than my sorrow, for a life that didn't feel borrowed. 8 years old when I met my first bully. When I let him make a meal of me, starve me of happiness, shielded me from God's goodness. 10 years old when I had to lie about where my father was. Why I couldn't go on field trips, why we stopped doing Christmas gifts, lie about why no one could come to my house. When church folks opened their doors to us, I was so ungrateful, just wanting a house to call my own. 12 years old when I stopped eating. Hoping for a reason to be better than I am, hoping for an avenue to find friends, concave with brittle bones. I fell to my knees, hoping God would love me more once I was prettier, skinnier, praying he would have more mercy on me if I looked better. 15 years old when I asked God to take me away. 15 when I repented and asked him to let me stay. 18 when I found a better church. Christian friends and a new relationship, one I could forever count on, one between a father and his daughter, where I found joy and prayer and surrender, a relationship that reminded me that I am a king's daughter. 19 when I went back home. 19 when the world started to understand the horror of living in black skin. 19 when I attended every protest, wrote every poem, wrote until my fingers and heart would bleed, tears that would never end, terrified of what was to come from my brothers, sisters, and black community. 19 when a boulder shattered the fragile pieces of my family. Relationships destroyed, the hurt was overwhelming and so scary. 19 when my sister passed away. A drill in an already gaping hole in my soul. I tried to pray. I went to church, but I couldn't understand. I couldn't feel. All I was hurt. It's been a year and I still can't fully breathe, knowing I'll never again see her smile or her voice so sweet, but I rest assured that she dances in the paradise she deserves with our Heavenly Father. 19, when I couldn't return to school. An escape I thought I needed, no longer on my path. 20 now, and I sit unsure of what's next. Every day I pray and feel safe, knowing all the heartache I face is required to test my faith, to build me stronger, so I'm prepared for what is in store. Every problem has a purpose, yet I don't know what it is. I don't know what I'm meant to do, but I know I never have to carry my burdens alone. I know my Father hasn't brought me this far to leave me, and it took me 17 years to finally believe. But I'm so happy I had an almighty creator who is always rooting for me. I've been trying to find something worth holding on to, seek and hope to find. And what I found was the promises of my Father, whose love is never ending and forever divine. Thank you. And now I'll pass it off to Michelle.
Thank you, Devisha. I'd like to say thank you today to the transition team for their important work and the leadership for leading today. And I'd like to add a special note of thanks to Rick Brewer, who has decided to step away from the transition team at this time. St. Andrew's United Church and the transition team are grateful for his time and his leadership. I'm going to pass it to Michael now.
Amen.